Hey, what's going on, everybody? On today's show, we're diving into Anthropic's new economic index that reveals how AI is actually being used in the real world. So it's really exciting. And, look, forget the sci-fi predictions. Anthropic has just analyzed over 4 million real conversations with their AI assistant, Claude. And, look, I think the results might surprise you. That's what we're going to talk about today. Did you know that nearly half of all the AI usage is concentrated in just 2 areas? Hang out with us today as we break down all these findings and what they mean for the future of work. This is the Daily AI Show. Today is February 13th, 2025. And today I am joined by Jimmy, who's back. Welcome back, Jimmy. And he's hanging out with us as well from Canada and his travels. We have Beth, and then I am Brian. So, yeah, this is a fun one to talk about because there's just a lot to dive into with this economic index. Probably before we go too far. Well, actually, I do have an announcement really quick before we go too far and we get into today's show. Okay, tomorrow's show, really quick, is today is episode 399. Tomorrow is episode 400. Really excited about that. And so what we decided to do, because it's Valentine's Day, and I'm stealing this from Gwen, who called this our sweetheart episode tomorrow, which I love. So thank you, Gwen. We decided to bring you, our audience, onto the show. So we put out an all call yesterday, only yesterday, and said, hey, if you're interested in, if you've been a fan of the show and you're interested in popping on the show tomorrow, email us. Well, we got a lot of responses, and I even had more this morning that I was responding to. And so tomorrow we're not only going to have whoever can show up from our crew, the DOS crew, but also we're going to have a lot of you guys coming on to the show. So what I will say is this: if that sounds interesting to you, but you just missed the boat, I promise you this was a popular idea. Been responding to emails for a while. And we will do this again. I said maybe to Gwen we'd wait to 500. I think we'll probably do it before that because you guys really thought it was a good idea. So tomorrow we will have a selection of our listeners on the show with us. But just know that if we can't get you on tomorrow's show is simply because of limitation and not wanting to do a 3-hour show. And we will do this again and we will put you at the top of the list. So I just want to make sure everybody heard that. Thank you so much for the huge outpouring. It was kind of overwhelming in a great way to be in there in the emails yesterday talking about it. Okay, so that's the news for tomorrow's show. But today, as I said, we're going to be talking about the economic index. So I feel like with this one, we typically will go to Andy first because I love Andy's breakdown of what it is. Andy, I don't want to put you on the spot, but are you ready to kind of make this easy for our audience? Come off mute first.
Yeah, so get off mute, and then I can say something about it. So, as an introduction, this was a highly automated AI analysis of the actual text of exchanges with the Claude chat interface. It did not include the API.
Mhm.
So it may significantly underrepresent any component that was set up by more sophisticated companies who are using it for business purposes and employing the Claude API to get the AI's result. So it has to be understood as, we're analyzing the actual conversation of a live human typing into the chat interface here. So in that context, though, now you have a very clear picture with a very large data set of these exchanges with the AI of what kinds of application uses people are talking to the AI about. And so it's very important information, but is in a sense incomplete because it doesn't include anything that was done by, let's say, a large enterprise, which is unlikely to represent fully in the Anthropic Claude chat dialogue what they're actually doing with AI. Just as an example, if you have a supply chain automation routine that's doing deep analysis of your actual supply chain using machine learning and AI and LLMs in a combination, that's not showing up here at all. So I think there is a lot of business application here that may be underrepresented. Now, another slight difference that I will point out here is that they break it all down first to classify, and classification is a very important skill of an LLM. They break down the conversations and classify them into 6 main categories. before they even go into the detail of saying, well, within this category, how, what are the actual tasks that are represented by this dialogue that we're
Right.
analyzing? So the main categories are computer and mathematical, arts and media, education and library, office and administrative, life, physical and social science, and then business and financial. But now let me point out that in arts and media, which we might expect it would be using a lot of tools other than Anthropic Claude, to do image generation and so on, and in concert with other API uses of an LLM. Um, they include here, for example, technical writers, copywriters, and they talk about the tasks which are manage organizational public relations and strategic communications, and develop and execute multi industry marketing and promotional strategies. Well, I think that should actually go in business and financial. So,
Can I push back on this really quick, Andy? Because I think there is a clarification here. The six, this is the way I understand it. So, tell me if I'm wrong. The six that are on here are just examples, but just below that, they talk about how they actually use the ONET from the Occupational Information Network. If you just scroll down a little bit more right there, last paragraph, right there. Go up, go up. And so they're saying that they use actually a database of over 20,000 specific work related tasks from ONET, which is from, I believe the government puts that out. I got the impression that the six that they're showing are just six examples, but no, actually they break it down not by six, but by 20,000. Am I reading that wrong?
Yeah, I
no,
think
what you're doing is occupational classification.
patients, yeah. Okay.
You're not reading it wrong, but I think there is a step in there that you're glossing over, which was they first classified each of them into one of these categories before then assigning them to an occupational classification code. And so as a result, a lot of things that are in arts and media, because they were already put in there, are actually tasks that are clearly associated with business, is my point.
Okay.
So anyway, with that as an introduction, I think it's much more interesting to actually see what kind of tasks are within, and the tasks come from. Well, here's another point of information that I think addresses part of that. If you look at three different of these larger classifications: office and administrative, life, physical and social science, and business and financial, each one of them has the task: record, analyze, and report operational and research data. So each one of those categories has that as one of the primary top three tasks in that use category. So anyway, that's clearly a capability of LLMs taking a large lump of data and analyzing it and creating a report of what it understands about that data aggregation. All right, so I think that's enough of me talking about the methodology. But now let's get into what some of the conclusions were as a result.
Well, I think also it's important. A couple of the caveats. Number one, this is just Claude. It's important to remember that. Now, you were even saying more than that. It doesn't include enterprise. It does include API. These are 4 million Claude free or pro conversations on either the web app, or you would have to be at the Claude website for this to have counted. So important to know that. Also, 4 million is a lot, and there's a lot of insights to gain out of a data set of 4 million inputs. Also, though, Claude is not the top tool use, right? This is not also including OpenAI or Grok or any of the other ones. It has nothing to do with that. It's simply from Anthropic and the tool that they have. So while still impressive and a lot to learn, which we're going to dive into here, important to understand where the limitations are of it. And the other thing I wanted to bring out too is just how they broke this down, because they said our research began with an important insight from the economics literature. Sometimes it makes sense to focus on occupational tasks rather than occupations themselves. Jobs often share certain tasks and skills in common. For example, visual pattern recognition is a task performed by designers, photographers, security screeners, and radiologists. And then it goes on to talk about how certain tasks lend themselves to be automated or augmented, and they break that down as well too. But I think I actually liked it the way they did this, is that they didn't try to say like, oh, what does a photographer use AI for? Why would a photographer go and use Claude? Or why? It's more about the actual tasks that are happening and breaking it down that way. And that may even speak a little bit, Andy, to what you were saying about how there's overlaps in these different occupations because, well, we have lots of tasks that overlap within it. Just the Daily AI show, rather, different show, the Daily AI show, rather. We have everything from a little bit of coding to a little bit of automation to a little bit of augmentation. It's all mixed and matched in there just to produce this show. There's multiple different tasks that would go across, different roles in there. So just wanted to bring up those two parts to it. But Jimmy, Beth, jump in with, your initial thoughts and we'll get into Cleo and all the other safety precautions and all that stuff as well.
So, one of the things that I was just trying to figure out because I don't see it in the data, and now I can't. Perplexity's like, I don't want to talk to you this morning. Um, I feel like I remember hearing that API usage was a significant portion of Claude's usage compared to ChatGPT. Like the majority of people using ChatGPT are actually going to the chat of the GPT and interfacing with it that way. I think if I remember correctly, there's a good chunk of people using Anthropic Claude that are doing it through the API, but I cannot find the percentage. And the reason that I'm looking for that is because that's not included in this data either, which also, like, does an interesting skew because, that obviously people who are using the API have, like, are doing more, technical kinds of tasks, right?
Yeah.
Because 'cause they're setting up the API. So
In fact,
yeah.
they have several caveats at the bottom of the not the paper. So let's just clear a couple things up. There's pieces to this we can dig into. There's the blog that they read, that wrote. Andy was just sharing that on his screen. There's the paper. There's a blog about Cleo that has to do with the security. We'll get into that. There is a paper from December about Cleo. Then there's a Hugging Face data set that anybody can download and use. It's open source. You can go play with this data set. The same one that they're using, you can use on open source or on Hugging Face. And so we'll share that on the screen as well. So there's like kind of like, there's blogs and papers and things like that. So these are summaries. But these are some of the caveats they say. We can't know for certain whether someone using Claude for a task was completed a task for work. Someone asking Claude for writing or editing advice could be doing so at work, but they could also be doing it for a hobby. Relatively, we don't know how users were using the responses for Claude. Were they, for instance, copying, pasting code snippets? Were they, in fact, checking responses or accepting them uncritically? We also analyzed data from Claude.ai free and pro plans rather than API team and enterprise users. We've talked about that. While Claude.ai data contains some non-work conversations, we use a language model to filter this data to only certain conversations relevant to occupational tasks, which helps to mitigate this concern. The sheer number of different tasks means it's possible that Cleo, the safety part of it, classified some conversations incorrectly. Claude can't generate images except indirectly via code, so some creative uses won't be referenced in the data. That's actually important. Given that Claude is advertised for using as a state-of-the-art coding model, we might expect coding to be represented as a use case. For that reason, we don't argue that the uses in our data set are representative of a sample of AI use in general. So good to know, like they're putting it out there, right? They're like, hey, this is interesting. There's lots to be learned. Also, caveats, all the ones Andy, Beth, you said, as well as the ones they're actually pulling out in this data set as well. Okay, do you guys want to get into some of the initial findings and sort of talk about, some of the interesting stuff that they had come back about it?
Yeah, well, I think the big takeaway is that uh, the largest category of use at 37%, so 40% of the exchanges with the chat interface were in computer and mathematical. And that because Claude is reputedly one of the very, very best coding assistants. So the kinds of tasks that were being talked about in this category were programming and debugging computer systems and machinery. So you can imagine, that is a very likely, business use case of the thing or not. It could be that these are independent programmers who are, working for, in a consulting role or whatever. Um, and designing and maintaining database systems for data management and analysis. But the biggest one was develop and maintain software application and websites. So that's 40% of all the conversations in the Claude interface. Surprisingly to me, were 40% of them were all about coding, and I think the total of develop and maintain software applications and websites was 16%.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to say too about how good it looks and how early Claude was with making it look good on the what's their right side panel called?
Artifact.
Artifact. Thank you, Beth. That's sad because I used to call it Artifact before Canvas, and now I use AirSuit. Now it's messed me up. But anyway, Artifact on Claude, and I mean, we're talking about months and months ago. You were able to run code before OpenAI in there. You were able to run like simple Python scripts and stuff like that. We did demos on this show of building simple landing websites. It's very, very user friendly. And so it doesn't surprise me that considering we're not talking about the API in this case, we're talking about having to have gone to Claude.ai and knowing how good that artifacts looks on the right side of the screen, it doesn't surprise me at all that, and it's marketed as such, that the coding is such a high volume of it. Interesting, Ninglo. I use Claude all the time and I never use it for coding. So there's certainly other people out there like me who are using Claude. The one that doesn't come up necessarily in here is consistently how much Claude is uh, um, valued for its creative writing, which is polar opposite of coding. It's like the fact that that Claude is so good at coding and so good at creative writing is pretty impressive considering those could not be farther apart, as far as like deep storytelling and the exactness of having to do coding and how that if this then that type statements in there. So it doesn't really come up in this data set, or at least I haven't delved far enough into this data set to know it was the appropriate word to know where that might be representative. But like I was surprised, Andy, not to see a stat about creative writing because I'm like, oh, that's what Claude is awesome at. It's like so good at that.
Yeah,
Well, there is in respect of creative writing, there's copywriters is one of the largest, it's in the next largest category, arts and media. So I think that people, who are in those, tasks like, the one that is clearly a part of arts and media in my schema of categorization here is produce and perform in film, TV, theater, and music. So people who are creatives are definitely using Claude. But the actual tasks that are let's call them occupational types or application types that they list here are technical writers, copywriters, and editors. But again, I think that reinforces the second largest category is anybody who's working with language and wants to have really, really good editing assistance. Then Claude's been a go-to for that.
Yeah, Jimmy, if you're writing movie scripts, do you think anybody is, I mean, I'm be honest here, any script, do you think anybody is being like, nope, can't look at Claude? It's like, I know there was actor strikes and there's good stuff out for this.
I okay. So I think that particular situation is probably a little more nuanced, but the
The broad strokes, no?
well, well, here's the thing. If you look at what the percentages they've said of whatever task spelled within that occupational category, they're they're in the single digit, right? It's 1%, 2% like usage, right? And that's 1% of the usage of that category within that 1 month period or 4 million conversation period.
Mhm.
Okay. And if you take that into account when you're looking at, well, where's Claude in the usage of all of the generative AI tools? And how much is generative AI used by the larger population, right? And then when they talk about the percentages of people who are using AI in the number of tasks or the fraction of tasks that or percentage of tasks that they're using throughout their, their work day or, uh, throughout their conversations, only 4% are using it for, what was it? 74% or 3/4 of their work tasks. So yes, I think people who are using AI for creative purposes or creative writing are for sure looking at it, having conversations, maybe getting, writing snippets and things like that. But I think if you're looking at arts industry and the percentage of people using it, I think that's still very small. Plus, there's this whole right now, there's a strong through line in the arts community where it's if you touch it, it's bad. So you're not gonna admit it for sure. Yeah.
Not to admit it. I'm glad you put that part in, not gonna admit it, because I would be the one out there going like, I don't even Claude? How do you even say the Claude? How do you say the name? And I would be using it, on the side. So I do think it's like maybe a dirty little secret with some of that. So and fair point, Jimmy. I kind of threw you on that, and you're right. It's way more nuanced and outside probably the scope of today's economic index.
Well,
Uh,
I think right now, if you are a savvy AI creative, you are using a tool like Claude in an editorial capacity.
Yeah.
Right.
Which, hey, by the way, brings up their part about the facts about augmentation. Before we get to the security side, augmentation versus automation. And now it wasn't super skewed one way or the other. They say that it leaned with 57% towards augmentation, meaning collaborating with humans, versus automation, which is without humans, right? And I don't think anybody's shocked by this. I actually, if anything, I'm shocked about is that automation was at 43%. And there's probably nuances also on how it was deciding that, as it was going through. So there's more to probably be uncovered there. But this is what I see when I see this data set without, downloading it and diving into it with tools like maybe I want to use ChatGPT and I want to dive into this data set or Perplexity. Um,
You're gonna let me know if you want your thing on the screen.
no, not yet, because I'm sorry, that's Nets for Cleo. Yeah,
Awesome.
thanks, Beth. I put it up and then we kept talking on this one. But I definitely see this as like an indicator of, what I think a lot of us talk about, which is that yes, there's going to be areas where AI, perhaps coding, as we're seeing that, could perhaps replace jobs. But we also see a lot of coders are using it to augment how they write code, to become more efficient, to maybe clean up their code or problem solve or troubleshoot. And I think what we're also seeing, at 57% is the people using Claude for the data that we have and its limits, that people are learning how to use this as an efficiency tool, which is what we keep talking about too, is there's going to be job disruption. There's going to be brand new jobs that we couldn't even possibly imagine today that might happen in the next 6, 9, 12 months. That's going to happen for sure. But what I see and what it seems to suggest when it talks about how the lowest wage and the highest wage earners are sort of not the ones using Claude, it's the middle. And so that's a big chunk of people and they also talk about people with bachelor's degrees were the highest grouping of people using Claude. That's not surprising to me at all. That's people like me sitting at a desk outside of this show when I'm working 40 hours a week with Scaled. That's what I'm doing. I'm using Claude and OpenAI and all that. And yes, it's sort of meta because I'm building AI solutions, but I'm using AI to bring efficiency to my work stream to bring more efficiencies to other people. So it's meta in that sense. So it's not like, and I think Anthropic also says this, it's not surprising data, but it's really interesting. And this is the first data set of many. And so it'll be interesting to see how, not so much what's today, but in 12 months, how does the next 3 data sets, if they put these out quarterly, adjust? What are the trends in the data that they're grabbing? And I think that's going to be super, super interesting. What numbers are going up? What numbers are coming down, as we
Yeah,
model.
I think it's a good what's awareness or entry point for a snapshot, right? Because this gives us, then the way they explain it in the blog as well is that this is an attempt to show indicators, right? Provide insights of like what you're saying, what's going up and down, how is the usage being, what are the entry points for people and things like that. And I think it speaks to a larger possible strategy from Anthropic and the Claude folks, is because um, we've seen how OpenAI does things, and we've seen how Google does things, and Microsoft and whatnot in terms of their and to some extent Elon and Grok is they're trying to put out whatever the next great foundational AI model is. They're trying to provide more of a unified user experience so that you don't go off and need to use these other tools and things like that. But what I've seen come out steadily from Anthropic is infrastructural approach, right? They came out with their MCP based based tool set or framework for computer use, right? So that anyone could build it into their tool.
Yeah.
And we've touched upon the API side of things. That's a huge component of how Claude is used, whether that's through coding and programming from like Cursor or some other coding tool, but it's all that's the API and enterprise side. So it seems like they want to build the roads and they want to build the lighting and the framework of the house, so to speak. I know my analogies are kind of going all over the place there, but uh, but the idea is providing the infrastructural tools so that you can build upon them as opposed to providing a direct customer facing user experience, right? This isn't the new Microsoft Office where OpenAI totally seems like the new Office,
Yeah.
right? They want you to write in Canvas. They want you to develop there. They want you to integrate your other tools. And eventually it'll, if they can just handle the deployment side of things, how to get it out there, you could actually start making the tools, which I know we're going to do an episode on Hugging Face Spaces. Yes, just checking out that yesterday, but I don't want to diverge the conversation too much. But that place is awesome.
We
So yeah, to bookend this, I think this is another step in showing, hey, we can provide you insights into AI as a whole. These are the things that this is the value that Anthropic and Claude provides, is we've created the infrastructure for you to build your other AI tools.
Yeah, good call. I love how you broke that down. And you were talking about the MCP. Also, good to remind everybody that Claude from day one was built on a constitution. They're different. They're fundamentally different on how they decided to go about building their language model. And it wasn't through reinforcement learning or human reinforcement learning. It was built off of a constitution that determined how it would act and respond, and they're just different, right? And so if we were to plot a graph of respected AI tools, I'm not going to call it, say for anybody, but for me, it would be like, oh, I don't know, DeepSeek, because I'd be concerned about the Chinese influence and so on and so forth. Meta, for a lot of people, would be towards maybe the bottom of that because people just inherently don't particularly love or trust like Facebook and Meta and things like that. And so they might have an opinion on that. OpenAI is in there somewhere. You could throw a whole bunch of other, but for me, towards the end of that graph would actually be, as far as respected tool, it would actually be Anthropic. I think they've done a great job of continuously coming out and being research based, empirical based, and saying, this is what we're about. They have not pandered. They have not come out with necessarily an image tool or maybe what would be flashy for people. They seem to just really have their head on their shoulders and be very clear about what it is they're trying to build. You don't get at least this, again, my opinion, I don't get the impression that Anthropic's like, what are we, where do we go next? Where do we go next? It's like, no, this is what we're doing. This is what we're building. And now we're getting data on it. And to your point, Jimmy, maybe they're going to reinforce. Maybe this will push them to make even better coding tools if that's where they see a lot of their audience. Or they might say, hey, you know what? We're doing pretty good there. Let's reinforce this other area to try to draw in new users in another area as well. So I think your point is super, super valid on that.
So it's interesting, because I did not see a place where it says what the cutoff date is for the data. I'm sure if
Didn't
we
see the
go
data.
to the data, because the data is available, I'm sure it says there, but I didn't see. And I feel like part of what is important about this is the context in which these conversations with Claude were happening. Because a bunch of people, when O3 came out, said, nope, not using Claude for coding anymore. O3 is better. Right. And so now O3 is like that preferred kind of thing. So I wonder how much that skews the data in terms of representing what's happening now versus that time window that it's referring to. I personally, I think as we go further and further into this year, if things continue to speed up, couple announcements about like when Grok 3 is coming and 4.5 and 5 from ChatGPT, right? As those things start to speed up, I feel like it's more important. I want to see what your time window, what's your universe for the data, and what was the context in which those conversations were being had.
I just looked, by the way, just to see if I could find the answer. On Hugging Face, they don't have any dates as far as like the data, but it's a good call out. Like, during what time period did those 4 million um, conversations or back and forths happen? Because that could probably tell us a lot too about what we would know historically about what was available. Was this pre Sonnet 3.5? Was this pre, other? I don't know. I mean, it depends on how long ago this was done. And the walls,
I have
what
to
the
double check.
backends are.
I have to double check the paper, but I think the analysis I got was that it's from December to the end of January.
Okay, well then that's awesome. Then it's really, really recent. Now, Beth, you mind bringing up the screen that I've had on this? Sorry about that. Ben, poor Beth. Both trying to manage all our conversations in the chat as well as bring up our different screens and stuff. I wanted to bring this up. This is important. Cleo, and way back in the chat, maybe 10 minutes ago, who said it? Justin or somebody said, every time I hear Cleo, it makes me think of somebody's cat or Miss Cleo, the psychic. And that's exactly whoever said that. I apologize. I'm trying to find out who. Justin. Every time I hear the name Cleo, I think of a friend's cat named Cleo or Miss Cleo, the psychic. Um, well, I don't know your friend's cat. So Cleo, the psychic, is who I always think of when I hear this. But let's look really quickly. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but I think this is important. How are they mining the data? How are they getting this information? If Anthropic is all about data privacy and user privacy, hold on a second. What are they doing? Now, you can choose to believe that they're telling us the truth or not. This is what they say. How Cleo privacy works, privacy preserving analysis at scale. Wow. It says it does so while preserving user privacy. Data are automatically anonymized and aggregated, and only the higher level clusters are visible to human analysts. So if you can't see our screen, what they're basically showing is that they have 4 columns. They have 3 private columns that are conversations, facets, initial clusters, and then the only thing they're saying that humans can see are the hierarchical clusters, and that is visible. So conversations are like literally the conversations. The facets start to break things down into how to tie shoes, help tie bows in daughter's hair, information about xenon deficiency syndrome, things like that. Then there's clusters, which is more like what I think, Andy, you were talking about, tying various knots, information about genetic conditions, web development. And then it starts to put them in these buckets on the far right: daily life skills, art and design, programming tasks with subtasks and sub buckets underneath them. So that's what they're saying is happening here. And they say, here's a brief summary. They have extracting the facets, then semantic clustering, then cluster description, and then finally building the hierarchies. Clusters are organized into a multi-level hierarchy for easier exploration. They can then be presented in an interactive interface that analysts at Anthropic can use to explore patterns across different dimensions, as such as topic, language, etc. Which, by the way, if we look at the Hugging Face page, this data set's been downloaded 4,165 times already. since this came out or whenever they, says the last month. So I could quite literally do my own analysis. Maybe I have a data analysis tool. Maybe I want to just go in and play in Claude with this analysis or go to any of the other tools like OpenAI or ChatGPT that does well with big data sets as well. And I could go through this data set myself and, come up with all sorts of thoughts about what it means and stuff. The not the least of which is if you are trying to figure out how to implement AI strategies, to maybe do AI training to help your particular industry, this data set can be really valuable to you because it's kind of giving you at least a little bit of a peek into who is currently using these types of tools. Obviously, this is just for Claude, but from there, you might be able to glean some good data that says, oh, you know what? Um, I was thinking about making an AI course for dog groomers and how they can use AI prompts to do that. Now it's an extreme example because you think like, what is AI going to help them with tomorrow? With that. But maybe that's where you were going to go. But maybe you look at this data set and you go, oh, you know what? There's actually maybe a quicker path if I was to focus on this area because it appears they're already using AI or Claude in this way. Or I'm going to focus on a bachelor degree mid-level workers or something like that. So there's a lot that you can take out of this that isn't necessarily even in their report for your own uses as well, which is super cool.
Yeah.
When I first heard about this, and I thought because it was called the economic report, and some of the verbiage around how it was being described indicated that we would be able to use this data to understand how AI is being used. And I think that I'm a little skeptical that this is a real representation of how AI is being used. And I'll give you this example. If I asked you, what are the two main functions in companies that are using AI and actually possibly disrupting the current economics of that particular function? Uh, Tell me what you think the two functions within a company are, and I'm talking department level, that are being impacted by AI. And that is a representation from another sort of data set of how AI is being used. What are your votes on that? Anybody? Okay, I'll sit.
Marketing, more like department level, marketing, and analysis, like business analysis kind of stuff.
Okay, and I would have to add to that customer support because
Oh,
customer support is disintermediating people who do customer support. There's no question about that. Well, in this data, those two things represent only 2% of the total. So it's not really capturing the way AI is being used, particularly in companies, and that could be an artifact of, no pun intended, the fact that it's not using the API, and most of those things might use the API, but Claude might be used. Maybe other models are being used in preference by people who are doing marketing strategy and developing social media marketing content and all that sort of thing. And so I think this is not quite getting to the answer I was hoping for. It is a very interesting set of data, and you see some interesting, quite specific descriptions of the tasks that are being done by people typing into Claude, and that's interesting. But it's not telling me how is AI being used today in the marketplace and what are the economic impacts.
right. And the other thing that's not really capturing, even for its own operator like functions, is that kind of piece. Because again, this data seems to be from a time when agentic features were not as both agentic and maybe you said December, January. Agentic features and maybe not as much of the reasoning, although it seems like the reasoning would be coming off the back end of that data, because that was released in January, I believe. Those big ones. So the agentic features, I think, also play into this because then, how much of your task, your analysis, your creation tasks are part of an agentic sequence and therefore would not show up in this as well.
Sorry, here. Well, I was looking at comments. I apologize.
Yeah, no, we'll get Brian on that too. In our defense, I believe there is some audio delay in the conversation, but yeah, the chat is definitely lively today. So I wanted to monitor that a little bit. I mean, I love the discourse, of course, but everybody's great. Um,
It just felt like that pause felt like, we're all just in rocking chairs on a porch somewhere, just going, uh-huh.
slip
Yep.
sipping the lemonade and the iced tea. It's like, yep, storms are coming. I
It
feel it in my.
sure is February.
Yep.
Mhm. Okay.
All right. I know we've talked about the various, not pros and cons, but the gaps from this report as a whole. But I think in their blog they've done a good job of identifying the caveats and whatnot, and we've mentioned that earlier. I want to take a look at how could it from that infrastructure approach that I mentioned earlier. Could this be, or could their methodology be used in a wider scale? So what was the limitations and how can we build upon those limitations to give them more accurate? Is it simply just starting to add the enterprise and API information in there? Is it more defining um, of the occupations? Because right now they're just using that occupational code from ONET, right? So it's just like, here's a conversation, here's where we think it's connected to, and then their Cleo tool, which I think what this might have been used to highlight a little more on its usefulness. Um, is it also just a matter of adding additional data sets in? If there was a public data set from OpenAI, if there was a public data set from Microsoft or Mistral or, any of those groups that have usages, especially globally, Mistral's probably a good choice there. Is if you just added in those elements, would this process or the insights provided by this process be more complete? And do you think this could be the basis for a standard, right? Just like the MCP is an attempt to create a standard for people to build off of. Or do you think there's an intrinsic issue with this methodology or this process that needs to be addressed first before just simply adding more data? So that's my.
I just want to jump in to say we have used the acronym MCP a couple of times here, and I just wanted to say that's Model Context Protocol, which was a standard for interaction model to model, and it supports agentic applications. So Anthropic led the way with that, and I think I haven't heard much about it since it was released. It was an exciting development at the time, but it might be worth us circling back to MCP at some point and seeing, has this actually come into broad use? Because setting a standard is one thing, getting people to adopt the standard is another. And so let's maybe put a placeholder in there for the audience that we'll try to give you not a full show about MCP, but just a capture on one of our recap shows of what's happened with MCP since Anthropic introduced it.
And we did do a show on MCP, did we not?
There was a full show, so you can go back
I will
and look at
that.
that. Oh,
That's the problem with 399 shows. Sometimes we've had full 30, 40 minute discussions and we go, we talked about that? Is that a conversation? So yeah, I love the there was a reference to 99 problems in the chat that made me laugh, by the way, on there. Thank you, by the way, to the chat for self-regulating. I threw the best. Yeah, I was about to jump in there and I did not hit send. So thank you, chat. You guys are great. We love our community, which is a good reminder about tomorrow's show that we will be inviting. I know that was a good pivot, was it? that we'll be inviting some of our followers, people who are or follow the show for a while, who want to come on and say hi or hello. That's what we're going to be focusing on tomorrow because it is our 400th episode. We try to do fun things on the hundredths of the episodes at this point, and most of them have been mostly us looking back. And tomorrow we wanted to do something a little different and go, you know what? Let's take this opportunity to not only celebrate the show, but to celebrate you because, well, I mean, we might still have a show, but I'm not sure how motivated, the six of us would be if there was literally nobody ever listening ever, nobody interacting in the channels, nobody being part of the conversation, because everybody that's live in the conversation, plus the comments we get elsewhere with people who can't watch us live, really doesn't help us inform the show. It informs future conversations, all sorts of things. It helps us change our mind or sway our opinion on something. So it's a vital part of how this show works. So that's what we're going to be doing tomorrow. As I said, there was a lot of response to that. So at this point, there's a chance that if you reach out, I might not be able to get you in tomorrow. I've been sort of managing that on the back end, and just know that I will respond to you regardless in an email and tell you, hey, we just couldn't slot you in because at this point, we got to give a couple minutes each person coming on. So if you have reached out and I've reached out back to you, just know that I'll have more information coming as far as a link, what do you do, those kind of things. That's all coming in emails. Give me a little bit of time today to get it all sorted, to get people in the places. Not everybody can be available for the whole hour, so there's some complexities there. But that's all coming up tomorrow. So if you're interested in meeting some of our followers, some of our supporters of the Daily AI Show and hearing their AI story, then we're excited about it. We don't know any of these. So we're going to be learning right along with you, which is the fun of this show. That is tomorrow, Friday, Valentine's Day, for what Gwen called our sweetheart show, which I love, February 14th, our 400th episode. So that's it. Lots to be learned from this economic index. Thank you for all the insights from you guys. Andy, I think you've kind of, reinforced and I appreciate you for, pointing out how this is a small, although large, it's still a small sample size and it's not necessarily reflective of the whole. And so careful how you use the data. I think that's a good caution all along the way. Any last thoughts before we wrap up? No?
No,
Everybody
I'm
says no?
excited for tomorrow. I want to meet y'all.
Can't wait. Can't wait. Tomorrow's going to be super fun. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for everybody in the chat. Bye.
Aloha.